Hey guys, Corbin here, and I'm making custom cabinets for my kitchen, and I want you to follow along as I make it so you can learn how to do it yourself. In this episode, I'm going to make the face frames for the cabinets. The face frames are the portion here which surrounds the doors and the drawers. Now, it's not too difficult to make. I use pocket hole screws, and let's jump right into it. Here's an overview of the cabinet that I'm going to be making. If you want, download the SketchUp file and dissect it to get a bit more familiar with it. The first part to make is a face frame. Usually a face frame will be on all four parts, but I wanted a clean look and eliminated the bottom piece in my own design. Note that this right hand piece here has a 45 on the back that we'll have to cut. I'm going to start planing some alder lumber down to the final thickness of 3/4 of an inch. But first, I want to talk about what I purchased. I got S3S lumber, which means it's surfaced on 3 sides. It wasn't too much more expensive than rough stock lumber. Plus, with rough lumber, I'd have to buy more to account for unforeseen knots, whereas buying S3S allowed me to pick and choose the best boards. It also means you don't need a jointer to do this type of work. Just a 12-inch desktop planer is probably good enough. The S3S lumber comes a bit thicker than 3/4 of an inch, and I need to plane it down to 3/4 of an inch. So plane with the grain to avoid tear out. And the way that I easily do this is I just go and grab the boards and mark them on the side with the general grain direction. And what I did is I drew this grain direction on the side of the planer and I just match it up. So once I run a board through, I have to do the flip and rotate. So first I flip it to do the other side, and then I rotate it 180, and that way the grain direction is the same. So I own 3 blades. I have a general Combo Max blade for cross-cutting, which could be used for ripping too. I have a dedicated plywood blade to get clean plywood cuts, and a dedicated rip blade. So I'm going to toss the rip blade on. Once I have the rip blade on, I don't want to do any cross-cutting with it, so I'll cross-cut with my circular saw, or I'll use a jigsaw. I don't recommend this clamping technique. I cross-cut lumber so it's about 1 inch larger than the pieces I need to cut. It's easier to rip smaller lengths, and I get less warping as the crosscut will relieve some tension. Since I bought S3S lumber, I don't have to joint one side. Instead, I use the straight edge to rip the rough edge clean. Sometimes I rip both sides clean so I can avoid defects. Then I set my fence to final width and rip a bunch of pieces. If the pieces are warping, I'll rip it about 1/16 of an inch oversized, then rip it again to final width. The first rip relieves the tension and I can get straighter pieces on the final width. Next I'm going to do some cross cutting, so I do a quick blade swap from my rip blade to my cross cut blade. For cross cutting, I recommend some type of stop block in your fence to allow you to make repeatable cuts. The Incra fence I use has 3/32 of an inch ridges for the stop block to allow precise, repeatable cuts. Quick tip, if your crosscut blade is a little dull, toss on some blue tape to keep it from tearing out. As I make pieces, I take them off on my plans as to what I've already made, and I just stick a little piece of blue tape on each piece and mark with a letter which piece it is on my plans. Next, I create some pocket holes on the back side of the face frame in these locations shown in the model. I found that 1.25 inches is about the thinnest width I can use to make double pocket holes. A 1.5 inch thickness of the rails and stiles is much more workable width, and I recommend using that in your own projects. I have an older Kreg jig that I mounted to a board. I just clamp it to my table and line the piece up by eye. No one will see the pocket holes in the back, so precision isn't all too important. Once I have the holes drilled, it is time to start some sanding. I only sand what is necessary at any particular time. Before assembling the face frames, I sand the interior portions shown here, which can be difficult to sand once it is assembled. I sand the outside after they're all assembled and attached to the cabinets, and I rarely sand the inside because you really won't ever see it. After the interior is sanded, I can glue together the face frames. I was always taught to apply glue to both surfaces, and I spread them out with my finger. The pocket hole screws make it so you don't have to use clamps, and I wipe the excess glue off with a damp rag. My face frames are open on the bottom, which means I need to be particularly careful with them until they're glued into the body of the cabinets. Normal face frames are a complete square and isn't too much of an issue. The interior style piece needs to be carefully measured, and so I flip it over to make sure I don't make any mistakes in locating it. And then I go ahead and glue and screw it on. Okay, so that was making the face frames, and next we're going to make the sides for the cabinets, which are 1/2-inch plywood embedded in some solid alder wood. And it's a little bit more advanced, so it's going to take a little bit more time. And subscribe, follow along, and watch the next episode when I finally release it. Thanks everyone.